Fullness are the essence of his character.
The Anansi that I wrote about was, he was a trickster, but he wasn't a bad person, because the whole idea of the Anansi thing for me was that Anansi represented the underprivileged people, the slaves, so to speak, and Brother Tiger, his adversary, was the slave master and stuff like that, right? And Anansi's role was to always, he being a small creature compared to Brother Tiger, was to use his brains to outsmart Brother Tiger. So all my stories are centered in that direction. Anansi is not, in my opinion, Anansi wasn't a bad person. Wasn't a bad character. Anansi was like a champion for the people.
In his stories, Davis often depicted Anansi against Bra Tiger, his adversary, and let him come out on top as a symbol for the underprivileged.
I tried to emphasize that the book is not only for children, it's for anybody, children and others. And the stories, what first drew me to the Anansi Bra Tiger folklore was the fact that it originated from Ghana. And it was the African slaves who were brought to the side of this world, who brought the folklore along with them. And that's how I make I get interested in it. And I thought was one of the things that inspired me to write them stories.
Having written 16 Anansi stories over his career, Davis is a pioneer in the literary scene, alongside authors such as Sir Colville Young and Adler Ramklam. However, the art of creating a Bra Anansi story is still alive in the culture as new authors emerge and take up the mantle. Charlotte Neal, author of Belizean Storytime, told us about her desire to bring these stories back into the spotlight.
So this was a labor of love, and it took me over 5 years to actually publish the storybook. For me, these stories are personal. I grew up in an environment where, of course, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have television, and so our pastime was stories. And my uncles, my other relatives, I relished listening to those stories, those folklore stories. Of course, Anansi was at the center of a lot of those stories. And so for me, it was nostalgic when I started to put pen on paper. And what I wanted to do was recreate that memory, because I don't see stories like these a lot anymore. And so it was the reason I decided to do Belizean Storytime.
Neil told us that when creating an Anansi story, his cunningness is the most important part of his personality to remember. To make the stories her own, she depicted Anansi as the trickster that does not always get what he wants.
Growing up, I always learned of Anansi as the trickster, and I wanted to put a little spin on Anansi. And in most of my stories, I wanted Anansi to get a taste of his own medicine. And so most of the stories have a moral, and in those stories, Anansi outsmarted himself, basically. And so that was what I wanted to do, especially for younger kids, to let them see that, hey, you can try and outsmart, but hey, somebody is always smarter than you. And so I didn't want to leave it as Anansi, the trickster, getting away with stuff. That's not the lesson I wanted. The lessons I wanted was Anansi is tricky, yes, but there is a lesson to be learned in morality from these stories.
Neil's book was published in 2017 and can still be found in bookstores and libraries along with the works of Davis and other Anansi authors. However, she explained that she is working towards having the book republished in the standardized Creole. Sylvana Uds of the National Creole Council of Belize explained how they have been working to ensure the Anansi stories are accessible and true to Belizean culture.
One of the first things we did was to try and, one of the first things that we do that try capture some of the Anansi story then. So Dr. Irvin Beck back in the 1970s, me come and record and get permission from people like, I think this man not even alive again, and if he is, forgive me for saying that, Adler Ramklam. And his Belizeanized versions of these Anansi stories that the word Anansi itself, we could have it as Hanase, Hanansi. So that's one of the few words with 4 variant spellings reflecting different pronunciations that appear standard across the country. And so Anansi, we know, we documented, and we really thank Sir Colville Young and people like that and Dr. Beck and others for having done some of this work.
Even though the Anansi character did not originate in Belize, he has found a home here, and by placing him in locations and situations that Belizeans are familiar with, he is a relatable character to read about, whether he wins or loses at the end of the story.
This is a compilation of short stories, and in a lot of these stories we put Anansi in the center of the communities doing everyday stuff, like Anansi is going to church, Anansi celebrates Valentine, Anansi has an encounter with the police, and so I think Anansi is actually at the center of a hurricane, and of course in all of these stories Anansi is trying to win, to come up, to trick somebody, and the turnaround is always that he doesn't succeed.
Davis reflected on his time writing Anansi with pride and fondness, highlighting the laughter he was able to bring to people as one of his great joys.
As I tell you, I'm a creative writer, and I know how to create plots. I just use my imagination, and I just come up with whatever plot I needed, and they were all meant to create laughter, you know. If you read any of my story, I'll make you laugh. I guarantee that, because it has happened before, you know. So it was easy for me to create these plots. It's very easy. That's something I took pleasure in doing, you know.
And if the pin never bend, the story no me wa end. Brittany Gordon for News 5.
Mexico's press comes to highlighting Belizean culture. Many think of rich food, dynamic music, diverse ethnicities displayed